Hello, my name is Eric and I'm your Lord Commander. Welcome. The Slapchop technique. Dude, I love it, and since it's so simple, I decided I would share my process of the technique for you all. And today I will demonstrate the Slapchop technique on these little Nurglings. These guys are from my Demons of Nurgle starter set. I built these guys ahead of time and let them sit around until I was ready to make the video. Not gonna waste any time, so let's get to it. The first thing you need to do is prime your model black. I definitely recommend shaking the can for the full 2 minutes. It really helps the paint come out evenly. I use Chaos Black from Games Workshop, and it is my preferred black primer. It dries quick and is very matte. Once the primer is dry, after about 15 minutes or so, we can move on to step 2, which is dry brushing. Alright, dry brushing. This is definitely the most important step in the Slapchop process. If you're not familiar with dry brushing, no worries, because I will explain the process as simply as I can here. The first thing you want to do is grab a small sponge of some kind and dampen your brush just a little bit. I use the Mighty Dry Brush from the Army Painter Masterclass set, but you can use any half-inch dry brush of any kind that you like. So first dab your brush on the sponge and let it dry off by lightly brushing it on your skin. What you're feeling for is that last little bit of moisture. You want to feel only the slightest bit of coolness. That's when you know it's wet enough. So I started this step with some Mechanicus Standard Gray from Games Workshop and thinned it out on my wet palette. Using the Mighty Dry Brush, I rolled the side of the bristles into the paint. This prevents the paint from globbing in the center. Next, take your brush and scumble it across a texture palette. I made my own using sand, PVA glue, and a coffee can lid. I sprayed with black primer and called it ready. There are many different versions of texture palettes, so find what works for you. What you're looking for here when scumbling is that the paint is coming off on the palette and it's only slightly visible. That's when you know it's ready for the model. So right now we are applying the darkest gray to the model. Already you can see some definition from shadow to light. What we're doing with this dry brushing step is essentially creating a monochromatic underpainting, or a grisaille. This method of glazing and underpainting has been used for centuries in the fine arts. And I'm so glad it made its way to the miniature painting world because it's such a satisfying process. This underpainting is essentially a gradient we can glaze over using our contrast or speed paints. So this dark gray is our first step in building that gradient. The next step would be a few shades lighter gray. I'm using Dawnstone from Games Workshop. It's about 2 to 3 shades lighter than Mechanicus, so this will give us a pretty good effect. Switching over to the moderate dry brush from Army Painter, I applied the Dawnstone in the same fashion as the previous color. Albeit I'm loading a little bit less onto the brush and removing a little bit more on the texture palette. We don't want as much paint coming off as the first step. With this gray, I'm only painting the higher, more raised portions of the model. I'm avoiding the recesses as we want that to stay black because it will be our shadows when we apply our speed paints. Once you have good coverage and a decent gradient forming, you can move on to the last dry brushing step, which is the color white. For this final dry brush, I use White Scar from Games Workshop. I thinned it on my wet palette, and using the miniature dry brush from Army Painter again, I brushed only the areas where I want to draw the most attention and become our focal point, like the faces, horns, shoulders, and all the guts and tongues these dudes got. With that last dry brushing step, you should have a very nice black and white Nurgling. They should be ready to headline your next noir art house film project that's sure to go viral. This underpainting helps us establish those shadows and highlights in one step. Then we're ready to apply our paints. Now this is where we bring these guys to life. And let's start off with the skin. I'm using Maggot Skin from Army Painter's Speed Paint 2.0 line. I work this all over the models, making sure I'm getting the paint into the recesses. These Nurglings have so much detail, and the way the Slapchop technique works relies on that gradient we created. So make sure you get it into the grooves, but if there's too much, just grab a dry paintbrush and soak it up. I ended up using 2 coats of the maggot skin to get the coloring that I wanted. These guys are already showing some signs of life, and this is one of the reasons the Slapchop technique is so great. Moving on to the next feature on these guys, I painted all the silly ass tongues these homies got sticking out all over the place. I didn't want a blood red or a pink, so I opted to mix 2 colors together. Goddess Glow and Slaughter Red from Army Painter. But any brick red or brownish red should work fine in this color scheme. I'm using the Army Painter Regiment brush for this step. It's a decent size and it's not too small. Because we created that gradient in our dry brushing step, we can just slap this on and keep painting. Nurglings are the little minions of great unclean ones. They swarm, claw, and bite with razor-sharp teeth to overwhelm their adversaries. They got these great little guts and disease-feculent skins, so I figured let's get some awesome contrast and color on these nasty guts with some Moonlake Purple. Sticking with my regiment brush again, I went around the model, slapping this on any exposed innards and entrails. And I definitely wasn't careful on this step either. Even if that purple gets onto the skin, it'll only help tint the skin and sell that bruised and diseased effect. So these guys are looking good and nasty, but not complete yet. So next, I went on and painted the teeth. I don't think Nurglings visit the dentist on the reg, so I used some bony matter from Army Painter. It has a great brownish sepia tint that gives teeth, horns, and bones a great grungy yellowing. It really sells the nastiness on these guys. And I found only 1 coat necessary to get a satisfactory effect. Nurglings wouldn't be complete without some mischievous looking eyes. I wanted them to stand out from the green and be an important feature because the guts can really steal the show on these guys. For these eyes I picked out Nuclear Sunrise from Army Painter, and again using my regiment brush painted the eyes and sockets on all 3 models. This bright warm orange gives a great contrast to the cool green of the skin. Our Nurglings are really looking good now, and they're nearly tabletop ready in only 50 minutes of painting so far. I think that's pretty damn quick. Since we're slap chopping these bad boys and we really just want to slap our friends with how good our minis are painted, normally I would jump right onto the horns and call them done, but we want to see the looks on our filthy friends' faces when we set these guys on the table looking legit, while their models look like the paint was globbed on by some mouth-breathing yard ape. So next I took some Iandin Yellow contrast paint from Games Workshop and applied it to the edges of the gut, skin, pimple spots. We won't wow or strike fear into our buddies with bogus minis, so this quick glazing step really sells the plague-ridden effect. So this could be your last step if you're only slap chopping. So next we're on to the horns. I wanted to stay in the cool spectrum of colors, so I picked out one of my favorite blue grays, Runic Gray from Army Painter. Now these horns are very vertical, so one thing to note is that your paint will run on this step if you use too much. So make sure you wipe out your brush as you apply the paint in the step. If you add too much, it will run down and onto the skin. And if a simple slap chop is all you need, then feel free to get these little Nurglings on the table. But we want more, don't we? We want to feel powerful. We pray to the painting gods. So we'll take these guys a step further and add some highlights to really make these plague buddies pop. I pulled out some Ushapti bone from Games Workshop and thinned it down on my wet palette. I'm using a precise detail brush from Army Painter, and I did a thin layer on the prominent teeth. I'm only hitting the high portions of where the light would catch. Now, remember to avoid the recesses and not load too much paint onto the brush. These guys don't floss and we want them to look like it. One thing to note when using such a small brush and a small amount of paint, it can dry very quickly, so I'm cleaning my brush every 2 Nurglings per model. I don't want the paint to dry on the bristles. Still working on the highlights, we want to make those glorious guts pop now. I took the Moonlake Coral from earlier and mixed it with some white scar and hit all the areas catching the light. The detail is so small here, I don't mind just adding white for the highlight. If the model was larger, I'd probably opt for a lighter value in the same family, like a lavender for example, but for these little details the white is fine. Next I worked the highlights on all the tongues, adding white scar again to Goddess Glow and Slaughter Red mixture from earlier. And these guys are really looking awesome now, and I want to bring them all together, so I'm going to add a wash to the skin for one last glaze of uniformity. I took the Regiment brush from Army Painter and brushed on one thin coat of Athonian Camo Shade from Games Workshop. This will smooth out all the transitions in the gradient, and it helps distribute the color into a more unifying effect. And I'm going to move back onto those beady little bug eyes, so I mixed a little white scar with a nuclear sunrise and dotted each eye. This really helps the eye stand out on such a small model. Now what Nurgling would be complete without some Nurgles Rot from Games Workshop Technical line? This stuff is real good green and nasty goopy and really shiny, and it's great. I used a number 0 synthetic brush and got small dollops of the rot and placed it strategically around the models. I put it into the folds of the skin and opening on any guts and entrails. It's Nurgle, man, it wouldn't be complete without some green pus. Last and certainly not least, we're going to add some texture to the base. Nothing fancy here, I used a number 2 Filbert Value brush and worked some Pro Acryl coarse brown earth paint around the bases. This will give a cool muddy effect, very fitting for some plague buddies on the move from the Garden of Nurgle. And I don't mind if it gets on the feet or stomach of these guys. They're scrambling and crawling over each other to get to the enemy and have a taste. So frankly, they could probably be muddier, but either way, I'm satisfied with the result. And a Warhammer model is not complete without some black around the rim of the base. So using a Abaddon black straight from the pot, I went around the rim of the base of these guys and painted them up. And after that final touch, our plague buddies, the Nurglings, are complete. I have to say, Slapchop was incredibly effective on these particular models. They have so many hidden details and are stacked all over each other, so using a classic base coat layering method would have just been painful. You would potentially be touching every feature on the way to paint barely visible details. It would have been a massive headache. These guys are very silly, very fun, and I cannot wait to unleash them in my next game of Age of Sigmar. And as you can see, Slapchop can give you some very good results in a very short time frame. In total, it took me 1.5 hours to complete these 3 models. Now that's only a half-hour model, and that's pretty damn quick for how good these guys came out. Now thanks again for watching. It really was a pleasure sharing my knowledge with you and painting these Nurglings today. I hope the Slapchop technique is equally as effective a speed paint method for you as it is for me. If Slapchop is your jam, give this video a like and subscribe for future content. Keep experimenting, keep learning, and take care.